Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank, first of all, Caritas for inviting me and organizing this event. The beauty of being the last speaker in the morning is, of course, that all your preceding presenters have presented all your ideas and all your thoughts in any case. So, excuse me if I sound a little bit repetitive. What I intend to do is to provide you with a perspective which is based on the education system and where UNESCO's mandate lies, rather than looking at it from a drugs perspective specifically. We're talking about the same population, but my colleague from UNODC, who is in charge of the drugs arena, is in charge of treatment issues, whereas UNESCO's entry point is very much related to the education sector. So this is where UNESCO comes into the situation, and I hope what we do is complement the actions of UNODC and other UN colleagues, but also add value to a great concern which we all have, and which is exactly why we're here today. So, again, to reiterate, education and the right to education is UNESCO's area of competence and area of concern, essentially. Education for all is at the heart of UNESCO's mission. This is a universally accepted goal with set targets to be achieved by 2015. And just as we are all looking at targets to be achieved in the world of drugs in terms of reduction of use, equally in the sector of education, we will by 2015 certainly not achieve areas of education in terms of access, quality, and the kind of education people require. There are many countries in the developing world that are unlikely to achieve the targets. While great progress has been made in ensuring primary education in many countries, issues of access, quality, and equity remain, which many who are marginalized and socially excluded because of their economic circumstances can't find themselves in. The main objective for education for UNESCO is the acquisition of values, attitudes, knowledge, and skills. UNESCO achieves this through approach to education based on the 4 pillars of education: learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. 4 pillars, I would argue, that today, in the world that we live today, are very relevant. To achieve a sense of awareness about the rights that they have. How many of us actually talk about the rights that drug users have in terms of access to education, in terms of access to treatment, in terms of access to other social services, for instance? We in Europe, in particular, are very, very privileged at the end of the day, compared to many of my colleagues who are sitting around here from the developing world, who clearly do not have the same amount of privilege that we have in terms of access to any of these. So from that sense, we need to be aware of that. But in essence, it's clear to me that education needs to provide a source for social inclusion for drug users. Improving basic and vocational skills in education, which includes literacy and numeracy, are very critical. For instance, it was interesting again to listen to colleagues presenting data about Europe and elsewhere, but in a country like Afghanistan or in a country like India or Pakistan or anywhere else, for instance, where you have populations of more than 60% who are illiterate, more than 60% of the population illiterate. So it's clear to me that prevention information needs to take another role and play another way of another strategy to communicate to that particular population, rather than looking at them as people with assets, people with potential. If they can survive on the street, and if they can at least be able to feed themselves, irrespective of how they're looking after themselves, if they're able or are able to traffic drugs, then I would recognize and I would acknowledge that there are skills that they have, which we need to basically take on board and to recognize them as assets and potentials to work with, and recognize drug users as people with assets rather than deficits. There's a difference. When I talk about a holistic response, I'm talking about not only the education sector working with the health sector, but with the finance ministries, but also with the employment agencies, with all the ministries and all the service providers, and therefore some joined up thinking meaning that none of us can do it on our own. UNESCO, through its emphasis on education and the provision of access to education, whether it's in the formal sector or in the informal sector, can only provide means of access to a starting point. But outside of that, we would need the support of UNODC, we would need the support of UNAIDS and other UN agencies at the end of the day to make our responses real and responsive. And again, to echo my colleague, providing simply prevention information is not going to do it. It's too simplistic, basically. Yes, of course, prevention information provides us with choices to make, but at the end of the day, if somebody's living on the streets and they haven't got any food in their stomach and haven't completed any education, whatever nice leaflets that I might provide them is going to have limited or no impact at the end of the day. What I need to do is to communicate to them in language that is meaningful, language that is accessible, and means that are relevant to them, i.e. in their lived realities out there in the public. So what I would do is I would echo my colleagues' questioning rather around the notion of drop-in centers. But what I would say is that there is enormous value in the drop-in centers, but there has to be an interrelationship between the existence of a drop-in center with the outside community. Therefore, peer education and outreach programs to complement the notion of what the drop-in centers provide in essence. I've observed it in Brazil and many other countries basically working very, very effectively. At the end of the day, we have to find methods and methodologies and mechanisms to reach people. And again, to reiterate what my colleagues have said, these are populations that are not going to come to us readily. We have sought throughout consistently to deny them access to come to us, because it suits us, because we like to work in nice, comfortable, formal environments, which they are not going to come to. So we have to find ways of reaching them. So I would echo again the value of drop-in centers and promoting strategies which enable access.